I'm always drunk in San Francisco. I always stay out of my mind. But if you've been to San Francisco, they say that things like this go on all the time. It never happens nowhere else. Maybe it's the air. Can't ever seem to help myself. And once more, I don't care. I'm always drunk in San Francisco. I'm never feeling any pain. But tell me, why does San Francisco, just like a lover's kiss, go straight to my brain? I guess it's just the mood I'm in that acts like alcohol. Because I'm drunk in San Francisco, you better believe I stay stoned in San Francisco. I'm always drunk in San Francisco. And I don't drink at all.
San Francisco.
Did you know that beneath the water in the San Francisco Bay, slightly to the north and west of Alcatraz Island, lie three large submerged rock formations? Harding, Arch, and Shag Rocks. Well, during the 19th century at low tide, Arch Rock used to appear above the bay like the eye of a needle, attracting daredevils who would try to row through it. Well, the pastime was abandoned after two young men were killed when the rowboat was smashed against the arch by a heavy swell. But Arch Rock was saved for a while by the sentimental opposition of a few veteran Californians who hated to see their odd-looking friend disappear forever. But the rock was dynamited in 1901! Did you know that? San Francisco! I just love it here. The beauty, of course. The weather. The food. Yes. The Giants! Spring training! Well, they still need a power hitting in left field. And the history. Well known and obscure. It's amazing. I mean, think about it. How many new international cities exploded on the world map? Like San Francisco. There had been a little known settlement called Yerba Buena, but in 1849, when gold was discovered, it was the place to go. It was as far west as you could go. On the edge of the continent. Attracting dreamers, life explorers, and folks who were just running away. How many cities are known throughout history by so many different names? Gold City, the Golden City, the Golden Gate, the city that knows how.
Baghdad by the Bay. Fog City, shaky town, the city by the bay, and, grudgingly known, mostly by tourists, as Frisco. Or, more recently, you hear a lot of San Fran. But, of course, by anyone who's lived here for a while, it's simply known as the city. How many cities are known for eras? Well, not decades. In the beginning, there were, of course, the 49ers brought the whole world here to the famous or infamous Barbary Coast. I mean, San Francisco was the unofficial capital of the Wild West. Yeehaw! Next, it was, unfortunately, known for the worst disaster ever to happen to a major world city, the earthquake and fire of 1906. But then during Prohibition, the wettest city in the West, and the noir years of the 20s and 30s, made famous by Dashiell Hammett. And the Fillmore District is the Harlem of the West, the Renaissance of jazz, changed music forever. And in World War II's jumping off point to the Pacific, as a young soldier hanging out in San Francisco, this might have been their last taste of freedom, the crazy fun, before being shipped to the Pacific hell. Some of them never to return to San Francisco for their trip home. The 50s brought the beats. Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, Michael McClure, Gary Snyder, so many other great poets, writers, painters, sculptors. It was another Renaissance wave, that's for sure. Followed by one of the most important decades in history, the 60s, with the anti-war hippie movement and Summer of Love, introducing psychedelic music to the world, along with some of the greatest bands of all time, like the Jefferson Airplane, Tears of America, Volunteers of America, and of course the good old Grateful Dead. And one of the greatest singers I ever saw, the late great Janis Joplin. Me, yeah, down on me, along with Big Brother and the Holding Company. Well, those 2 decades alone changed world culture. Well, the 1970s kicked open the closet door to the Castro District with the large gay and lesbian communities. Along with the music of disco with Sylvester. Along with the thriving punk scene. You know, the rebellious children of the beats and hippies. We are the ones. We are the ones. The Avengers, Dead Kennedys, Mutants, Noel Turner, Flipper Rules, okay? Well, it was a life-changing time for me. I was co-producing punk rock shows at the Temple Beautiful, 1839 Geary Boulevard, smack dab in the middle of the historic block. On one side was the legendary Fillmore Auditorium, where I spent my youth, and on the other, the People's Temple. The late 70s, early 80s brought a dark fame to the city. The People's Temple suicides, the murders of Harvey Milk and Mayor George Moscone. A presidential assassination attempt in front of the St. Francis Hotel, and, well, worst of all, the AIDS epidemic. Well, by the mid-1980s, San Francisco needed a laugh, and things lightened up considerably in the cultural world, where San Francisco was ground zero for the comedy boom. I mean, comedy was always serious art in San Francisco. From Mark Twain's first humor lectures to the comedy gold rush of the 1950s in North Beach with the brave and anarchistic Lenny Bruce, the committee, political humor, Mort Saul, and to the explosion in the 1980s with the political humor of Will Durst, and of course, Robin Williams. Well, the 90s and aughts finds it as the capital of world technology. Well, it's changed the city in so many ways. There were so many great spaces for music, performance, art parties less than 10 years ago that are all gone now. I had a friend who had been an award-winning sound designer at the Magic Theater, technical director at the Exploratorium, musician, composer, former bandmate. Well, he got priced out of the city, and last I heard, he was sleeping in the back seat of a car in a garage up in Washington State. I had another friend who actually ran and lived in his own art space. Painter, sculptor, musician, composer, writer. Amazing. Well, he lost his space, and he was last seen living in his van next to the Safeway out by the beach. Now, San Francisco has been known as an artistic laboratory since the 1860s at the Monkey Block on Montgomery Street. Well, the dot-com laboratories have caused a cultural crime. And it's really sad. I don't see why they can't set aside a few million of their billions to build some state-of-the-art living workspaces. It'd be a great investment in the city. I mean, San Francisco, without the artists, is a ghost town with a view. Well, my connection with the cultural history of San Francisco is mostly through the music of the late 60s. I was a deadhead before there was even a term for it. Well, when I was young in the late 60s, I used to hang out at this little radio station down in Los Gatos called KTAO, or KDOW, very 60s. And I mostly hung out with a DJ who had the Saturday all-night shift. We played mostly jazz, and sometimes I'd drop acid and just drip all night. And once in a while, he'd let me play one of the Dead's long improvised jams at 3 in the morning. He was, I don't know, about 20 years older than me, and told me that he had been good friends with Neil Cassidy. You know, the infamous friend and inspiration for Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg, and, well, as I knew him as the bus driver, rapper, and speed freak with the merry pranksters who hung out with the Dead. One day, he asked me if I wanted to go with him to have dinner at Carolyn Cassidy's house, Neil's widow who lived in town. I was like, really? Yeah, I'm there. I mean, she was married to Neil Cassidy and had a long-term relationship with Jack Kerouac, and, well, was a damn good writer herself. It was so cool meeting her and walking into this living museum. Neil, Jack, Alan, all their friends hung out over the years. Oh, she showed me some snapshots of Neil and her, and some that she'd taken out in front of the house. They become kind of legendary. Maybe you've seen them, of Neil and Jack with their arms around each other. I mean, the actual snapshots. Anyways, she could not have been nicer. I mean, making dinner for the two of us and telling all these interesting and some very humorous stories about everyone. It was an unbelievable night. And so long ago, it's almost like a dream now, but I'll never forget it. Never.
I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness, starving, hysterical, naked, dragging themselves through the Negro streets at dawn, looking for an angry fix. Angel-headed hipsters burning for the ancient heavenly connection with the starry dynamo and the machinery of night, who poverty and tatters and hollow-eyed and high set up smoking in the supernatural darkness of cold water flats, floating across the tops of cities, contemplating jazz.
Where'd you meet Jack Kerouac? They asked him. when we walked into the place. The place, the favorite bar of the Hep Cats around North Beach. Oh, I always meet my bodhisattvas in the street. Gary Snyder yelled, and then on it beers! Yeah, it was a great night. A stark night in more ways than one. Well, he and some other poets were scheduled to give a poetry reading at the 6th Gallery in town, and they're all meeting in the bar and getting high. But as they sat around, I thought he was the only one who didn't look like a poet. No poet he was, indeed. The other poets were either hard-ribbed intellectual hepcats with wild black hair, like Allen Ginsberg, or, delicate, pale, handsome poets, like Michael McClure, in a suit, or out-of-this-world, genteel-looking Renaissance Italians, like Philip Lamontier, who was like a young priest, or a bow-tied, wild-haired old anarchist fudge, like Kenneth Rexroth, or big, fat, bespectacled, quiet boo-boos, like Philip Whalen. And all the other hopeful poets were standing around in various costumes, worn sleeve corduroy jacket, scuffly shoes. But Gary Snyder was in rough whirlingman's clothes. He bought secondhand in Goodwill stores. He showed great sympathetic interest in me. He claimed at once that I was a great bodhisattva, meaning great wise being or great wise angel, and that I was ornamenting this world with my sincerity. Oh, Gary's buddy, big old good-hearted Philip Whalen, 180 pounds of poet meat. Who is he? I asked. It's my big best friend from up in Oregon. Well, at first you think he's slow and stupid, but actually he's a shining diamond. You'll see. Well, anyway, I followed the whole gang of howling poets to the reading of the 6th Gallery that night, which was, among other important things, the night of the birth of the San Francisco Poetry Renaissance! I mean, everyone was there. Oh, it was a mad night. And I was the one that got things jumping by going around collecting dimes and quarters from the rather stiff audience standing around in the gallery, and coming back with 3 huge gallon jugs of California Burgundy. And getting them all piffed, so that by 11 o'clock, when Allen Ginsberg was reading his poem Howl, drunk with arms outspread, everybody yelling, "Go, go, go, go," like a jam session, and old Kenneth Rexroth, the father of the Frisco poetry scene, was wiping his tears in gladness. Oh, Gary himself read his fine poems about Coyote, god of the North American Plateau Indians. "Fuck you," sang Coyote, and ran away. Read Gary to the distinguished audience, making them all howl with joy. It was so pure. You know, fuck being a dirty word that comes out clean. Oh, and then Gary showed his sudden barroom humor with lines about Coyote bringing goodies, and his anarchistic ideas about how Americans don't know how to live, with lines about commuters being trapped in living rooms that come from paw trees felled by chainsaws. His voice was deep and resonant, something earnest, strong, humanly hopeful. I liked about him. Well, the other poets were either too dainty in their aestheticism, or too hysterically cynical to hope for anything, or too abstract, or too political. Oh, meanwhile, scores of people stood around in the darkened gallery, straining to hear every word of the amazing poetry reading! As I wandered from group to group, facing them and facing away from the stage, urging them to glug a slug from the jug. Oh, wandered back and sat on the right side of the stage, giving out little wows and yeses of approval, and even whole sentences of comment with nobody's invitation, but in the general gaiety, Nobody's disapproval either. It was a great night. Delicate Philip Lamontia, red from delicate onion skin, which he kept flipping carefully with long white fingers, the poems of his dead chum, Hoffman, who had eaten too much peyote in Chihuahua. But read none of his own poems. Charming elegy in itself to the memory of the dead young poet. And read them in a delicate English voice that had me crying with inside laughter. Though later I got to know Philip and liked him. Among the people standing in the audience was Natalie Jackson, a girl with a short haircut, red-haired, bony, handsome, a real gone chick. And a friend of everybody of any consequence around North Beach, who had been a writer herself, and was bubbling over with excitement at the time because she was in love with my old buddy Neil Cassidy. Great! Hey, Natalie, I yelled, and took a big slug from my jug and shined eyes at me. Neil just stood behind her with both arms around her waist. Oh, between poets, Kenneth Rexroth would get up and make a little funny speech in his snide, funny voice and introduce the next reader. But, as I say, come 11:30, when all the poems were read and everyone was milling around wondering what had happened and what would come next in American poetry, he was wiping his eyes with his handkerchief. Oh, and we all got together with him. The poets drove in several cars to Chinatown for a big fabulous dinner off the Chinese menu with chopsticks, yelling conversation in the middle of the night in one of those free-swinging, great Chinese restaurants in San Francisco. This happened to be Gary's favorite Chinese restaurant, Sam Wo. And he showed me how to order, how to eat with chopsticks, and told anecdotes about the Zen lunatics of the Orient. And me going so glad, and we got a bottle of wine on the table. And finally, I went over to an old cook in the doorway and asked him, "Why did Bodhidharma come from the West?" "I don't care," said the old cook. I told Gary, and he said, "Perfect answer. Absolutely perfect. Now you know what I mean by Zen." Human beings probably arrived in San Francisco around 13,000 years ago. But these earliest San Franciscans left no traces. Well, the oldest skeleton found in the city is that of a female, unearthed during excavation of the Civic Center BART station, 1969, dating to about 5,000 years ago. Much of the terrain was covered in scrub brush, although groves of live oak, California buckeye, and bay laurel trees grew in a rectangle running from the southern part of San Francisco up through the middle of the city. Huge sand dunes carried down from the Sierra by vast rivers and deposited on the coastline had begun to cover the western part of the city, blown by the wind. Well, the strangeness of this landscape would have paled in comparison to the animals that inhabited it. Across the wide, grassy plain, now covered by the bay, roamed vast herds of enormous beasts. Huge Colombian mammoths rumbled along next to gigantic mastodons. Hundreds of giant bison weighing 2 tons and standing more than 8 feet high
headed through the Golden Gate. Western camels, antelope, deer, elk, possibly moose made their way across the plain. Tapirs and ground sloths, the size of oxen, lurked in nearby forests. Well, these grazing herd animals were stalked by the most terrifying mammalian killing machines ever to walk the earth. At the top of the food chain was the short-faced bear, standing 13 feet tall and weighing 1 ton. The short-faced bear was the largest and most powerful carnivore ever to live in North America, able to run an astonishing 40 miles an hour up to a mile, and more rapacious than modern bears. An estimated 450 short-faced bears inhabited the Bay Area. It was joined by saber-toothed cats, the American lion, dire wolves, oh, and even jaguars, which existed as far north as San Francisco until the 1820s. And if an animal was wounded, giant condors with 12-foot wingspan sailed overhead, waiting to pounce. Convention of 1920, holding in San Francisco, the most charming in American annals. The whole population shared in the credit for it. But chief praise went justly to the Honorable James Rolfe, Jr., mayor of the town. He was a man of bold imagination, and more than anyone else, he was responsible for the humane and enlightened entertainment of the delegates. For the heart of that entertainment was a carload of bourbon whiskey. Old, mellow, well, the best that money could buy. Well, the persons who go to Democratic conventions seldom see such wet goods. The general rule is to feed them the worst obtainable and at the highest prices they can be swindled into paying. It is assumed they'll drink anything, provided only they have enough kick. Now, Prohibition had gone into force only 5 months before the convention was scheduled to meet, and the Democrats arrived in San Francisco full of miserable forebodings. They feared that the San Francisco beauticians, abandoning all reason, would proceed to paint remover and sheep dip. Oh, what a surprise awaited them. Well, the moment they got to their hotels, they were waited on by small committees of refined ladies and asked to state their desires. Well, the majority at the start was so suspicious they kicked the ladies out. They feared entrapment by what were then still called revenuers. But the bolder fellows took a chance, and a few hours later the glad word was everywhere. Oh, no matter what the delegate ordered, you got bourbon. But it was bourbon to the very first drop. It came in quart bottles, and there was no bill attached. Woo! Ah! Yeah!
The weather. A series of days so sunshiny and caressing. Another was the hall in which the convention was held. A new city auditorium so beautiful that the assembled politicos felt like sailors turned loose in the most gorgeous bordellos in Paris. Downstairs in the spacious basement, there were lunch counters offering the whole repertory of West Coast delicacies at cut-rate prices. But under it all, of course, lay the soothing pharmacological effects of Jim Rolfe's incomparable bourbon. The effects of that bourbon were so wondrous. The bourbon had a positively therapeutic effect and cured them of whatever they were suffering from when they got to town. The climax came on June 30th. It was the loveliest day of the whole fortnight. The cloudless sky, soft as whisper of a breeze from the Pacific. As the delegates sat there in their places, listening to the speeches, they could look out of the open doors of the hall to the Golden Gate. Oh, and it was at San Francisco in 1920 that the first lady delegates appeared at a Democratic National Convention. Well, the earliest bird amongst these stateswomen was a Mrs. Fitzgerald of Massachusetts. As she appeared on the platform, the band leader let go with, "Oh, you beautiful doll, you great big beautiful doll." And Laura Fitzgerald's remarks were received with delirious enthusiasm. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah! But it was not the ladies, however, who made top score, but the Honorable Al Smith of New York. Well, Al, in those days, was by no means the national celebrity that he was to become later, so the band swung into "On the Sidewalks of New York." Well, by the time the band got to the second stanza, someone in a gallery began to sing. The effect of that singing was electrical. In 10 seconds, 100 other voices had joined in, and in a minute, the whole audience was bellowing the familiar words. Well, the band played 6 or 8 stanzas, and then switched to "Little Annie Rooney and the Bowery, and then to Maggie Murphy's Home. The scene was unprecedented in national conventions. Well, the first delegate who grabbed a lady politico and began to prance up the aisle was full of it. And so, for all I know, with the lady politico, well, they were joined quickly by others, and in 10 minutes, Al was forgotten. The convention was in recess, and a ball was in progress. Oh, not many of the delegates, of course, were equal to actual waltzing. But in next to no time, a ground rule was evolved which admitted any kind of music that would turn into cavorting to the music. Dun da da dun dun da dun da da dun da. So the shindig gradually gathered force and momentum. Well, by the end of the first half hour, the only person on the floor who was not dancing were a few antisocial hardshell Baptists from Mississippi. And for a while, the chairman, old Joe Robinson, made formal attempts to restore order. But after that, he let it run. And run it did, until the last hoofer was exhausted. And then a young man named Franklin D. Roosevelt got up to second Al's nomination. Well, the bosses of the convention made plans the next morning to bring the proceedings to a close on Saturday. But the delegates simply refused to agree. Their veins still bulged and glowed with Jim Rolfe's bourbon. But the supply of it seemed to be unlimited. Day by day, hour by hour, the ladies' committee produced more. Thus Thursday passed in happy abandon. And then Friday, woo-hoo! Well, on Saturday, somebody proposed boldly to adjourn the convention over the weekend. And the motion was carried by a vote of 998 to 26.
Well, that afternoon, the delegates, each packing a liberal supply of bourbon, entered into taxicabs and set out to see what was over the horizon. Well, San Francisco was perfect, but they sweated for new worlds, new adventures. Well, on the Monday following, some of them were roped by the police in places more than 100 miles away. I myself awoke on Sunday morning on a beach at Half Moon Bay. But that was caused not by Jim Rolfe's bourbon, but by the poet George Sterling's grappo. A kind of brandy distilled from California grapeskins with the addition of strychnine. Well, after the delegates went home, the Methodists of San Francisco got wind of the bourbon and started a noisy public cry into its provenance. But Jim Rolfe, who was a very dignified man, let them roar on without deigning to notice them. As a result, he was re-elected and remained in office until 1931. And in that year, he was promoted by the appreciative people of all California to the highest place in their gift. And there he lived, and there he was until his departed days, 1934.
Where are you at? Hippie Hill. Hippie Hill.
For 49ers, getting to San Francisco was an epic venture in itself. Well, there was the sea route starting off in New York or Boston, rounding Cape Horn, an 18,000-mile trip. It usually took 5 claustrophobic months. And there was the sea and land route via Panama, which was much shorter, but required a hellish trip through disease-ridden jungles. And there was the overland route, jumping off from St. Joseph, Missouri. But this meant dealing with vast deserts, unknown mountains. Each of these routes were long, expensive, and arduous. Many 49ers died en route, their bodies tossed into the ocean or buried by the trail. So, when these thousands of young men first sailed through the magnificent entrance of the bay and set eyes on San Francisco, they never forgot it. Well, the first thing the 49ers saw as they sailed around Clark's Point at the base of Telegraph Hill was a forest of ship's masts. Hundreds of ships were crowded next to each other off the cove, forming a perfect town upon the water. Well, most of these ships had been abandoned by their gold-crazed crews the instant they dropped anchor. Well, once ashore, the Argonauts found themselves in a place unlike any other on Earth. Combination campground, casino, construction zone, battlefield, strip club, depot, garbage dump, stock exchange and amusement park. The sheer spectacle was astonishing. Men in strange costumes, speaking a babble of tongues, hurried about everywhere, like ants in an anthill. Most were heavily armed. Thousands of tents were pitched anywhere and everywhere. Well, at night, this vast, colorful canvas city turned into a fairyland as lanterns illuminated the tents from within, and hundreds of fires lit up the surrounding hills. Well, San Francisco may have looked like a magic kingdom at night, but was still a barren, sandy, windswept place. The westerly wind blew sand and dust into everything! San Francisco, fascinating city to live in. It's handsome at a fair distance, but close at hand one notes that the architecture is mostly old-fashioned. Many streets are made up of decaying wooden houses. Even the kindly climate is sometimes pleasanter when read about than personally experienced. Nobody ever wears summer clothing. And you do not use overcoats, and you do not use fans. It is as pleasant a climate as could well be contrived. The wind blows there a good deal in the summer months, but then you go over to Oakland, and it has only snowed twice in San Francisco in 19 years. And then it only remained underground long enough to astonish the children. And along in the summer, when you suffered about 4 months of lustrous, pitiless sunshine, you are ready to go down into your knees and plead for rain, hail, snow, thunder, and lightning. Anything to break the monotony. You'll take an earthquake. Chances are that you'll get that too. Well, for a few months, I enjoyed what to me was an entirely new phase of existence. Butterfly idleness, nothing to do, nobody to be responsible to, and untroubled with financial uneasiness. I fell in love with the most cordial and sociable city in the Union. Well, San Francisco was paradise to me. I lived at the best hotel, attended private parties in sumptuous evening dress, polked with a step peculiar to myself, and a kangaroo. But I kept the due state of a man worth $100,000, likely to reach absolute affluence when that silver mine sale should be ultimately achieved in Nevada. But then all of a sudden, out went the bottom and everything went to ruin. My hoarded stocks were not worth the paper they were printed on. I had not now as much as $50. Well, I removed from the hotel to a very private boarding house. I took a reporter's berth and went to work. A month afterwards, I enjoyed my first earthquake. Yeah, it was one which was long called the Great Earthquake of '65, and was doubtless so distinguished till this day. It
was just afternoon. I was coming down 3rd Street, all the solitude and a Sabbath stillness. As I turned a corner, there was a great rattle, jar. It occurred to me that here was an item. No doubt a fight in a house. But before I could turn to seek the door, there came a really terrific shock. The ground seemed to roll under me in waves, interrupted by violent joggling up and down. I fell up against a framed house and hurt my elbow. Well, I knew what it was now, and at that moment, a third and still severer shock came, and as I reeled about on the pavement, trying to keep my footing, I saw a sight. The entire front of a 4-story brick building on 3rd went sprawling across the street. Every door of every house, as far as the eye could reach, was vomiting a stream of human beings. Gentlemen and ladies who were sick or taking a siesta thronged into the streets in all sorts of queer apparel. And some without any at all. A prominent editor flew down the stairs in the principal hotel, nothing on but one brief undergarment, met a chambermaid and exclaimed, "What shall I do? Where shall I go?" She responded, "Well, if you have no choice, you might try a clothing store." A minister was closing the services. He glanced up and said, "Keep your seats. There's no better place to die than this." And then added after the 3rd shock, "But outside is good enough." He then skipped out the back door. Well, the earthquake episodes that formed the staple of San Francisco gossip would fill a book. So I will diverge from the subject. After 3 months' absence in the Sandwich Islands, I found myself in San Francisco again without employment. I tortured my brain for a saving scheme of some kind. And at last a public lecture occurred to me. I sat down and wrote one. I showed it to several friends, but they all said nobody would come to hear me and that I would make a humiliating failure of it. Well, I was disconsolate now. But at last an editor told me, go ahead, take the largest